Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Veteran war correspondent Elijah Magnier returns to the show to update us on the political situation in Iraq. We talked about this extensively at the end of May in episode 56, and today Elijah gives us an important update and an insightful follow-up. We also talk about the pending Idlib operation in Syria and its many complexities, and Elijah offers some critical news and analysis on that situation. Elijah Magnier is a veteran war correspondent, a terrorism and counterterrorism analyst, specializing in Europe and the Middle East, especially Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Sudan, and Libya. He recently spent time in Iraq and is speaking to us today from Syria. This interview was recorded on September 14th, 2018. Hello, Elijah. It's great to talk to you again. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hello, Joanne. Thank you for having me again.
Yes. And for our listeners, you should refer to Around the Empire episode 56 that Elijah and I recorded on May 31st, which was after the elections in Iraq. And at that point in time, Elijah laid the groundwork, explained who all the candidates were and who the factions are, and just, a lot of information that's an insider's view of it, because he knows a lot of the people who are involved here. And it's well worth listening to that episode, either before you listen to this one or after, your choice. So Elijah, and he also on his blog, and you can find his blog at ejmagnier, magnier.com. And there's a series of articles that Elijah has published in more than one language, but certainly in English for English speakers. I don't know. There's probably 6 or 8 articles you've published since then on the politics in Iraq, right? Right, Elijah?
Yes, 8. Yes.
8. Okay, 8. And the most recent one, we do finally have, I don't think we have closure on this election, but we have a much better idea of what's going to happen. Is that accurate, Elijah?
Yes. I mean, we know who's not going to be a prime minister so far.
Right. So I thought maybe, can you say where you are, or are you in an undisclosed location?
No. I'm in Syria. I arrived yesterday, and I was in Iraq for the last couple of weeks, looking after the election and covering it. And it seemed that the meeting expected for tomorrow at the parliament, where not much is expected to happen, because there are differences among all religions and all sects, and everybody. I mean, nobody agree on anything yet.
Well, if we have time today, maybe we can spend about half of our time talking about Iraq, helping our audience understand just what happened to turn the tide in Iraq. And I saw that just maybe an hour ago on Twitter, you mentioned that there's going to be news from Idlib tonight in Syria. And since you're in Syria, maybe you could give us an update on what you know.
Okay.
So maybe we could spend about half our time on Iraq and half our time on Syria. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah. Okay. Whatever. I mean, you tell me what you want to know first.
Okay. All right. So in Elijah's latest article, he says that Hyder Abadi has fallen with the burned walls of the Iranian consulate in Basra. And basically, we have 2 factions. We have, just to simplify the whole thing, we have the United States is pushing for their candidate, Abadi, and Iran is pushing for not the United States candidate. And then we have Muqtada al-Sadr, who is sort of, I don't know, maybe would you call him a kingmaker in this case? Is that accurate?
Well, not actually. I mean, there are many changes now. I mean, I can go through it if you like. Would you like me?
Yeah. Let me just shut up and let you talk.
No, I'm sorry. So what's happening is, first of all, there was one very potential candidate, which is Haider Abadi. And that goes back to several months ago when I wrote an article about how the Iranian General Qasem Soleimani was losing the ground in Iraq and trying to push for Abadi. And that was a time where the both main players in Iraq who are not Iraqis, that is Soleimani on behalf of Iran and Brett McGurk on behalf of the US, because he is the US presidential envoy and the Secretary of State envoy to Iraq and to ISIL.
Right.
And at that time, they both agreed without meeting on Abadi. And Soleimani tried to push all the people who are close to Iran to support Abadi, but they refused. But as always, the US establishment is so good in playing in Iran's hand and trying to compensate what Iran is losing by their clumsy policy in Iraq, supporting Iran indirectly. And I'm going to explain.
And so you're being sarcastic there. You're saying they don't want to play into Iran's hand, but they inevitably do.
Well, yeah, they end up doing it for, I believe, their ignorance of the Iraqi dynamic and the Iranian-Iraqi dynamic and the relationship with the Marja'iyya. Iraq is extremely delicate country and
right.
Extremely delicate way to. There is a way to deal with the Iraqis. I mean, just to give you an example, once I was at the border trying to cross from Al Tanaf, Syria, into Iraq by car, and there were around 50 people all hanging at the small window of a Syrian officer who is releasing the stamp on the passport to cross into Iraq, but he's taking his time and drinking tea, and that it was around 50 degrees at that time, and everybody was in a hurry. And I was back in the queue, and I wanted my passport to be stamped quickly because I had 17 hours drive. There were no flights into Iraq. So I just gave my passport to an Iraqi, and I gave him inside $50. And I said, could you please stamp my passport, and these $50 are yours? Because he's a taxi driver, and I thought with $50, he would be very happy to take it. So he gave me back my passport, and he gave me back the $50. He said, I don't have a penny, but I'm not taking your money.
Oh.
So there's a kind of pride that one needs to understand the Iraqi mentality. And it is not by intimidation. It is not by threatening the Iraqis. It's not by trying to bribe them, generally speaking, because the corruption exists among the high level in the echelon of the Iraqi politicians. But generally speaking, this is not the way to deal with the Iraqis. On the contrary, you deal with the Iraqis by approaching them and trying to understand what they want and trying to meet their demand and trying to explain why there is a need to do this and not to do that. And they understand. They're very educated people. They are open to conversation. They are open to discussion. They all understand politics and they all have an opinion. So to go back to what I was saying, what happened is Abadi was the only Coca-Cola in the Iraqi desert, and everybody wanted Abadi.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly Trump decided to impose sanction on Iran. And that was fine. It is his right to do whatever he wants, regardless if it is counterproductive or it is positive. Nevertheless, imposing sanction on Iran, it means all the countries dealing with Iran, they have to stop dealing with Iran. They have to stop providing goods or exchanging oil or providing cash, whatever. They have to stop that. And it is just not possible for Iraq to stop dealing with Iran, exactly like Turkey said, I am not going to abide by Trump unilateral decision of sanctions against Iran because I have a strategic relationship with Iran. And with Iraq, there are millions of Iranians who travel to Iraq throughout the year. There are millions of Iraqi who travel to Iran throughout the year, and that is called mainly religious pilgrimage.
Right.
Where there are holy places for both countries and a common imams or religious leaders they believe in. And there is a commerce, and there are families married from one side to another. And for Iran is vital because during the embargo, it is essential for Iran to sell its oil and to continue the exchange of commerce with Iraq. And Trump can't stop it. So the main mistake that has been done by the Prime Minister Haider Abadi, when he came out without explaining to the population why he's doing it, saying, I feel sorry for the sanctions. I don't think they are right, but I'm abiding by them.
And he should have fought them.
Well, he should have kept quiet because first, it's not his decision. He's a prime minister ad interim. Second, this is a decision of the parliament that was dissolved and the elections were at the door and the result of the elections were by the door and waiting for the final results. So just he needed to wait a week or two before saying something that is going to turn against him. And when I talked to people around Abadi in his office, they said, well, unfortunately, that was a wrong move. Abadi was advised by many people in Iraq and outside Iraq to make this move because he will earn the full support of Saudi Arabia and in consequences the Sunni Iraqis by saying, I am going to go against Iran. Well, what he managed to get is most Sunnis are anti-Americans. They're not pro-Americans. And this is where there is a lack of understanding from all his advisors, mainly the Americans. And the Iraqi Shia turn against him, not because they are pro-Iraq, pro or anti-Iran. It's because you can't abide by American sanctions, particularly when Iraq lived for over 2 decades under the US sanctions, and there were over 1 million people who died, of which we all remember Madeleine Albright, who said it is worth it to have 500,000 children killed due to the embargo.
Yeah, that was horrific.
Yes, so the Iraqis understand what sanctions means, and they don't want to see the neighboring country, that is Iran, suffering from it. But above all, they don't want to look like they are accepting the Americans' dictate. And that was the main point. And then Abadi went on because then the event in Basra took place and started to pick up. And the situation in Basra was, regardless of any political movement around it or benefit, it was an uprising of the population, and they wanted drinkable water, they wanted electricity, they wanted job opportunities, they wanted to live better. I mean, Basra is the richest province in the world, producing over 3,250,000 barrels of oil per day. The entire Iraqi oil that is transported outside Iraq through Basra, through Shatt al-Arab, goes through Basra. And the province is entitled to get between $8 and $10 billion per year for its own development, and is getting between 800 million and 1 billion, with a large population this amount is extremely small. And therefore, what happened in Basra was one side. What happened in Baghdad was another side. What happened in Baghdad is Abadi managed to get a coalition, the leaders of the coalition of various groups signing a paper saying they are the largest coalition. And to explain very quickly, in the Iraqi constitution, a coalition of Iraqi political groups gathering under one umbrella need a minimum of 165 MPs to be eligible to choose the prime minister and his deputies, the speaker and his two deputies, and the president and his two deputies.
Right.
But what Abadi did with Muqtada Sadr is they both presented a paper where all the leaders of the different various groups saying they support this coalition. Let's call it Abadi Sadr coalition. That was correct and inaccurate at the same time. On the other hand, now I'm coming to that. On the other side, Nour al-Maliki, the ex-prime minister and actual vice president, presented a coalition with Hadi al-Amiri, the head of Badr group, with the signature of every single member of the parliament who supports this coalition, with a total of 153 members of the parliament, MPs. Now, the law says that we had this in 2010, 2014, the same situation. And in 2018, the federal court issued a verdict saying every single member of the parliament is entitled to vote personally to whoever he or she wants, regardless the group or the party that he or she belongs to, once they sign and they give their constitutional oath to the parliament. So what Abadi has presented few minutes before the oath is correct, that he has the signature of all the leaders of the parliament, of the leaders of the groups. But then 5 minutes later, that was
invalidated,
no longer valid, because every single member of the parliament gave their oath, and therefore his list is worth nothing.
Oh, man.
This is what happened. So because his list worth nothing, the oldest of MPs at the parliament, who leads the parliament now, temporarily, sent the two documents to the federal court. And the federal court is going to decide next week who is the head of the largest coalition, which is going to be Al-Amiri and Al-Maliki, and not Abadi. Now, that's one thing. The other thing is, in Basra, Abadi failed to respond to the promises he gave to the population, particularly in the southern of Iraq. And south of Iraq is mainly made of the poorest population of the country. And the south of Iraq has been suffering from the lack of basic infrastructure, and also the main young men who fought against ISIS were from the south of Iraq, and there are over 10,000 men who were killed while fighting against ISIS from the south of Iraq, and mainly from Basra.
Wow. And you're talking about are they still called militias, the Shia militias, or the Hashd al-Shabi, or they're also now part of the government, right?
Well, there is a narrative that is not trying to give up on its same rhetoric and still call Hashd al-Shabi as a militia, when there is a decree from the Prime Minister considering Hashd al-Shabi as one of the units of the security forces in the country. So they are exactly like the federal police, like the counterterrorism unit brigade, and like the regular army. And there is a unit called Hashd al-Sha'bi that are today under the umbrella of the security forces. But what is creating this misunderstanding, and it's good to explain it here, I'm going to be very quick, is there are many groups who fought under the umbrella of Hashd al-Sha'bi when they were fighting ISIS. And once the battle against ISIS was over, and ISIS has lost all the control of territory, Iraqi territory, then these groups withdrew from Hashd al-Sha'bi and refused to remain under the umbrella of the official security forces. And they are on the side today. They are a political party with a group of militia armed and quite strong. So this is when people talk about Hashd al-Sha'bi as a militia, that is totally inaccurate. Hashd al-Sha'bi is officially part of the Iraqi security forces. However, the militia who used to fight under the umbrella of Hashd al-Sha'bi and who refused to integrate within Hashd al-Sha'bi, they are still as they are. There is Asa'ib Ahl al-Haq, Kata'ib Hezbollah, Harakat al-Nujaba, Kata'ib Sayyid al-Shuhada, and many other groups. And they are still independent because there is also a law in Iraq where any political party that is part of the security forces is not allowed to promote itself for the election.
Okay, so they're basically forbidding political parties to have an armed, to have an army, some kind of a militia or an army.
Yes, they have a militia. These political party outside Hashd, they have their militia. But the Hashd al-Sha'bi is not entitled to be part of the political process. And this is why Abu Mahdi Mohandes, the vice president of Hashd al-Sha'bi, or the vice commander, did not present himself to the parliament as he used to be 4 years ago.
I see.
And he remained within Hashd.
Well, that is complicated, but important to understand, particularly for this situation right now, right?
Yes, exactly. So what happened in Basra, to return where we were in Basra, what happened in Basra, that Muqtada Sadr, he is Haider Abadi's ally in the coalition that was presented to the parliament as the largest one, which is no, but it's the federal court will give its sentence next week. And Muqtada Sadr is very well known as someone who liked to ride the events. And he saw the events in Basra, and because he is indeed the leader of the largest part of the population, and he's the only leader who can really lead a large group of the people on the ground, and that he has inherited from his father, his late father. Therefore, what he does is he always tries to take advantage of what's happening. And he took advantage of what's happening in Basra. And what is very well known is once you push the mob in the direction of riots, it's not easy to control them during the riots, but it's easy to control them afterward, but it needs a day or two to calm them down, which is exactly what happened. And the riots spread, burning all the offices that are disliked by Muqtada, including they went to the Iranian consulate. And that was the red line. And why I'm saying the red line is because Muqtada, despite his policy that is against Iran interference in Iraq, that is exactly the same as the one of the Grand Ayatollah Sistani, they both totally disagree to see Iran harmed or attacked or suffering from any other outsider or another country like the US. Therefore, burning a consulate, it means burning diplomatic building. They can burn any other consulate or any other embassy. Therefore, it's time to control the mobs. And this is when Muqtada pulled out. And to compensate, he said, his deputies came out and said, we ask for the Prime Minister Abadi to resign immediately. So he pulled out the support to Abadi with 54 members of the parliament. Abadi has been left alone. And not only, Abadi's group used to have 42 members of the parliament under his party that is called Victory and Nasr. Half of them went to his opponent, political opponent, Falih al-Fayyad, and left with him. 7 from al-Fadila decided to go, 3 of them with Falih al-Fayyad, and 4 remained neutral without supporting Abadi anymore. And Abadi was left with 12 members of the parliament. And that, I can tell you, is much less than the smallest group that is called Sayyid Ammar al-Hakim, with 19 members of the parliament, and he came close to al-Fadila with 7 members of the parliament. So Abadi was reduced to with no support whatsoever.
So the last time we talked, as you said earlier today, both Abadi was supported by both the United States and Iran. And then you explained the mistake that he made. And now, after the attack of the Iranian consulate in Basra, Muqtada al-Sadr removed his support from Abadi. Are you saying, I think this is what you said, are you saying he did that because a red line had been crossed and he was making amends for that?
That is one reason. There are 3 reasons. The first reason is because the federal court is going to say that the list of groups presented to the parliament.
Oh, right, of course, yeah.
And Abadi is not adequate and is not the appropriate one, because every member of the parliament should sign, and that is already a law issued by the federal court early on this year in February 2018.
So he was going to lose anyway.
Exactly. Second is because Abadi came out and said sanction against Iran, and he declared himself in line with the Americans and Saudi Arabia. And this is a line that is extremely not appreciated by all the Shia, including those who do not support Iran. And third is because the event in Basra was carried away to a point where Muqtada is going to be accused of leading the attack, the physical attack against an Iranian embassy, and that would have harmed him tremendously, politically and in the street. And this is why Muqtada managed to recover his position and gave up on Abadi and said, I am not with the Americans.
I see.
Which is something that he tried to avoid, even if we all know, all the players in Iraq and those who know what's happening in Iraq, they know that Muqtada is not pro-American. But he plays.
Right. We certainly don't consider him to be pro-American here, right? He's not very well liked. Yeah.
But the American administration considered him in the last 2 months pro-American.
Oh, that's right.
Supporting him. Well, it's not a surprise, because when the American establishment is supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria, that's normal. They support Muqtada in Iraq.
Yeah, it is complicated. And I'm thinking about the things our military say about Sadr, that's old news now. Everything's changed. But yeah, so the other thing that was interesting was I think it was the latest article, but may have been the one before that. You talk about, when al-Sadr stirs up a protest and all the people who follow him, are out in the streets. You're saying that there's tolerance for that from the leaders of the other Shia factions. And I think what you were saying was basically they don't want violence to erupt. They don't want fractures to erupt among the different Shia factions. But that all changed this time, right? With Basra?
Yes, they don't want to fight. They don't want an inter-Shia battle to kick off in Iraq, in Basra, or everywhere. They've learned there was one and the only a serious battle, inter-Shia battle between Hezbollah and Amal movement in Lebanon in the 80s. And there were a few rubbing in Iraq in the year 2000 at the beginning when Muqtada was rising and he believed his group is the strongest, and Badr tried to avoid any clash with him, not because they are weaker, but just because they want to avoid any battle. So yes, today, no Shia would want to fight, no Shia group would want to fight another Shia group.
Right, of course. But I guess the point that I think I'm not saying this very well, but when the Iranian consulate was attacked and burned,
yes,
what were they willing to use force against Muqtada's
only
people?
after the burning of the consulate, the Hashd al-Shabi and all the leaders of the various groups that they saw their premises burned, they went to the south and they said, okay, you've done that, it's enough. Now we are in the street and we're going to open fire against anyone who will approach our offices.
And that was a major factor in this whole thing, I take it.
Well, yeah, it adds to all the serious events that took place in the last days, and it convinced Muqtada that his people are going to be shot at, and he will then be responsible for the inter-Shia conflict.
Right.
But I mean, it was obvious that Muqtada will never reach that level, despite all the analyses that was written on the possibility or the war between Shia has started, and all this really very shallow way of looking at Iraq.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if you want to make any predictions or not, but you mentioned a name that I hadn't heard of before.
Yeah, well, so let me tell you what's going to happen, because we have a major event on Saturday.
Okay.
And the problem in Iraq is not only the Shia. The problem in Iraq are the Sunni and the Kurds. So let's take the Sunni. Today, normally in every 4 years, we have 2 Sunni candidates fighting for the position of the speaker. And it is not written in the constitution that the Sunni should take the position of the speaker, but it is something that they have agreed upon in Iraq among the Sunni, Shia, and Kurds, that the Kurds will take the presidency, the Sunni will take the position of the speaker, and the Shia, the prime minister, in a country where the majority are between 60 to 65% Shia. So on Saturday, we have a problem because there are 8 to 9 Sunni candidates, and all Sunni wanting to become the speaker. So we have in Baghdad, Osama Najafi. We have in Salah ad-Din, Ahmad al-Jaburi. In Anbar, Muhammad al-Halbusi. In Kirkuk, Muhammad Tamim. We have in Babel, Rashid al-Azzawi. In Mosul, Khalid Ubaidi. So all these are fighting for the position. Normally we have 3 provinces. Now we have 6 provinces or 7 provinces fighting. And the tendency of the largest coalition is to allow the Sunni in the parliament to choose their candidate. And if they don't, then they will go toward the one that is voted by the majority. And the one that has the largest possibility to win is the Anbar governor, who is Muhammad al-Halbusi, to become the new speaker, or Osama Najafi with less chances, but one never know. These are the 2 candidates. And for the prime ministership, that is more difficult, because the leader of the largest coalition, if Muqtada join them, they will no longer need the Kurds to support them. And the Kurds, they have 42 members of the parliament. And without the Kurds, with Muqtada on board of the largest coalition, that means it is above 165 MPs. Therefore, they don't need the Kurds to vote for them. And in consequences, they will not have to abide by the 27 demands the Kurds presented to any coalition willing to have them on board to fulfill so they can sign with them.
Would that include not giving them the president's position?
No. The president is for the Kurds, and there are the Kurds haven't agreed yet on their candidate, although Burhan Saleh is one of the strong candidates with a good chances. But we don't know yet. I mean, it's not final.
Okay.
Also, the Kurds haven't agreed. Now, about the Shia, the Grand Ayatollah Sistani came out and he said he rejects the renewal of any prime minister or any responsible who occupied this seat previously. And that means Ibrahim al-Jafari, Noor al-Maliki, and
right.
Haidar Abadi are completely excluded, and Ayad al-Lawi.
Okay.
And these four, it means they no longer have the chance to become a prime minister, right, including Abadi. But Abadi still is not convinced, and he's still running, and he's still saying, I want to become a prime minister for the second term because my party is voting for me. And his party is made of 12 MPs. Plus the US Special Envoy, although he told me in person that he's not supporting Abadi, but he's supporting his group, which is more or less the same. So he's supporting the 12 MPs that represent Abadi, and therefore he's supporting a really loser horse.
Does Sistani have any legal right to veto the prime minister candidates?
Absolutely not. He gives his opinion, and it's up to people to listen or to disregard completely. And Noor al-Maliki used to disregard what Sistani used to say.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And Abadi, I mean, look at Abadi. Sistani said no to any previous leader, and Abadi came out today and said, I'm still a candidate. So the power of Sistani is really a moral power.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, tell me if I'm mispronouncing this. Falah al-Fayyadi?
Yes, Falih al-Fayyad.
Fayyad.
Fayyad, he is the leader of Hashd al-Shabi, and he is the national security advisor to the prime minister. And he was excluded and removed from these two positions by the prime minister ad interim, Haidar Abadi. And he has contested that to the court, saying the decision of the prime minister is illegal because he doesn't have the right to remove a minister in his government, which is true according to the constitution, because the position of a national security advisor is equivalent to a position of a minister. Therefore, when there is no government and the government has resigned and there is no parliament, the prime minister ad interim has no right to dismiss any minister from his cabinet, according to the Iraqi law.
And now, is he acting as a front man, basically, for Amiri and Maliki?
Well, Amiri was rejected by Muqtada. 2 days ago, Muqtada, in private, said he is not with the election of Falih al-Fayyad. And Amiri said himself that he doesn't want to be a prime minister because he was the only one convinced to become a prime minister, excluding all the people around him, all the groups that support him, and they never supported his name for the prime ministership.
So what will happen if the faction with the most votes, the most ministers, doesn't have anybody to put forward as prime minister?
Oh, they have plenty of people. But
they have plenty, okay.
Yeah, there are many people. I mean, now there is Adil Abdel Mahdi, who is one of the candidates, and there are other candidates around ready to fulfill this position when the time comes.
I see. Okay.
But the negotiations are ongoing now.
They're just names that we maybe haven't heard before. People like me, I mean.
Yeah, but I mean, there is still time to decide upon the prime minister. And I think I will know that a few days before, or maybe the last minute. You see, Haider Abadi was selected in a few hours before when they went to the president, Masoom, and said, this is our candidate for the prime minister. And they just tricked Al Maliki and went behind him.
This is back in, what, 2014?
Yeah, 2014. And that was done just a few hours before the selection of Abadi as a prime minister.
When you said that Fayyad is backed by Hashd al-Shaabi, which Hashd al-Shaabi are you talking about?
Elected by Muqtada Sadr.
Okay.
And what the Iran is trying to do now is trying to bring all the Shia groups together so they unite and they avoid being split, so they have the strongest coalition. Iran is not going to succeed fully, but I mean, in a way, succeeding where the US is failing.
Yeah, I think that's the part that is less understood, is that it's not as cut and dry as everyone, or as some people would make it. Like, they would like to say, well, did the pro-United States candidate win, or did the pro-Iran candidate win? And it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, but I mean, we know one thing. The pro-United States candidate was Abadi, supported by Muqtada Sadr. And Abadi was dropped, left with only 12 MPs. Muqtada Sadr left Abadi and asked for him to resign. And therefore, the candidate or the bloc supported by Abadi and Muqtada is in pieces now and has failed.
Here's a hypothetical question for you. You know, some months ago, both the United States and Iran agreed that Abadi could be the best prime minister. Could that happen again? I mean, could it all be put back together, or?
Is that again? Sorry?
Some months ago, there was agreement from both the United States and Iran. They were both happy with Abadi. True?
Yes.
Now, if it happened then, could they put it back together again, is what I'm saying? Or has so much damage been done that they can never come to that agreement again?
Has been done because it is obvious, and Iran understood, thanks to Abadi, that the Americans want the embargo on Iran.
Right. Yeah, and he was going to agree to it, yeah. So that was it. All right, well, anything else we want to talk about with Iraq? I mean, thank you so much, because that's really complicated, and I appreciate you explaining that. Plus, you have information up to the minute, and you know all these players. I don't know how you keep track of all of it, Elijah.
Well, I've lived in Iraq for 9 years, and for the last 8 years, I've been traveling on and off, and I meet with the people in Lebanon, in Iraq, the same Iraqi officials who travel backward and forward. And if you want to be an expert or try to become close to know what's happening in Iraq, you have to be on the ground and you have to meet decision makers. We can analyze only if we have information. You can't analyze while you are sitting in Washington or away from Iraq, and then you don't have a daily contact with your sources on the ground who must be among the decision makers, the office of the prime minister, various ministers, member of the parliament, head of groups and militia, people in the street, the house of the Grand Ayatollah Sistani. It's a combination of all this that allows you to understand more than others what's happening in Iraq. But of course, we don't have all the information.
No, and it's constantly changing.
Yes.
So there are a lot of variables. It's a complicated problem. From my engineering background, I would look at it that way. But since do you have a little more time to talk about Syria?
Sure, yes.
Okay, great. So since you're in Syria, I haven't been caught up for the last few days. I'm not sure about the very latest news, but obviously we have the operation in Idlib is the big news. Everyone knows about that. And there's political complications mainly because what Turkey is the biggest complicating factor, I guess. And we have we have my government threatening all the time that they might attack and all of this, which we're hoping doesn't happen, by the way, hoping very much so. Now, they have opened humanitarian corridors, I assume, to Turkey or to other parts of Syria, or where will the people go if they can get out, if the civilians can get out of Idlib? Where would they go?
Well, actually, there is no need for humanitarian corridor these days in Idlib for two reasons. First is because there is already a way to come out of Idlib if the jihadists allow the civilians to leave toward all the areas under the control of the Syrian government.
I see.
And the second, the city of Idlib is not attacked for the civilians to leave. They don't need to leave because people are screaming, the wolf is coming when the wolf is just not coming. And I'm going to explain. First of all, the agreement between Syria, between Iran, Russia, and Turkey is very clear. In Astana, they agreed that Turkey is going to eliminate all jihadists, including Al-Qaeda and the Turkestan and all the others, and Idlib will join the political process, and it will be up to the negotiation with the government to find a way for all the Turkish proxy fighters, militia, and groups who are in Idlib under Turkey protection. So the government, the Syrian army, is not going to attack Idlib from one day to another, but the Idlib will have a special status, and this is why there were 12 observation points established along the city and the rural province of Idlib, Aleppo, and Hama, up to the Turkish borders, where the situation of Idlib will be freezed until the political situation is found. And Turkey accepted this deal on the condition that Russia will not attack Idlib. And when the terms of the deal expired, and Al-Qaeda and Jabhat al-Nusra, that is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is continuing to attack the Russian in Hmeimim base. Mm-hmm. They've sent so far 55 armed drones to attack the Russian base. They've launched several rockets against the Syrian army position and against civilian homes, but not many, just a few. So the Russians are saying to the Turks, if you are not able to control these people, remove them, eliminate every single jihadi, then I'm walking in with the Syrian army. And the last meeting in Tehran between Putin, Erdogan, and Rouhani, Putin was adamant about saying, now the time has come to get rid of all the jihadists that you're not managing to get rid of. Well, actually, this is not very accurate because so far the Turks were able to include under their umbrella tens of groups, including Ahrar al-Sham, that is considered a jihadi group and has foreign fighters among its organization.
When you say umbrella, do you mean a group of protected groups by Turkey?
Yeah, protected, controlled, directed. They obey to the Turkish will, okay. And they don't violate any deal Turkey make with any other country or other party.
Okay.
Now, the only problem remains with al-Nusra, that is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Al-Qaeda, that is Hurras al-Din, Tanzim Haras al-Din, the Uyghur, the Chinese, the Tunisian, Moroccan, Asian, and all the other nationality, Jordanian, Palestinian, Egyptian, that fight among the al-Nusra. Let's call it al-Nusra because people are familiar with this name.
Even I just say Al-Qaeda affiliated myself.
Yeah, well, the real Al-Qaeda now is Tanzim Haras al-Din, and Abu Muhammad al-Julani is happy to switch to Turkey, but he's finding a resistance within his group. So he doesn't want to lose his group, and Turkey believes, this is the last information, and that is going to be in my article, by the way, at midnight, that Turkey believes it is reaching a point where al-Nusra can join his group, or the army of Idlib. This is how it's expected to be called. And then there are hundreds of jihadis who already left Idlib to their home or another destination, supported by Turkey, to leave Idlib according to the Russian will and to the deal made in Astana.
I see.
So there are still jihadists in Idlib. There are still Al-Qaeda who refuse to abide by the agreement made by Turkey, the Russian, and Iran. And there are the foreign fighters who have no other place to go, and they want to remain in Bilad al-Sham and fight and die. So the Russians are saying, it's my turn to clean up all around Idlib, not the city of Idlib, all around Idlib. We're talking about the rural area of Latakia, of Hama, and of Aleppo, and of Idlib itself, so the rural area of these cities. And they will leave the city of Idlib to the Turks. And if the city of Idlib is spared, and that is the plan, therefore the civilians don't need to leave anywhere else, neither to go and invade Europe, as President Erdogan is trying to explain to the European countries. Therefore, the only bombardment that are taking place in Idlib are bombardments of objectives provided by the Bank of Objectives, fed from Turkey, from the Syrian army, and from Russian intelligence services. And these they have met before the meeting of the three presidents in Tehran, and they continue to meet to update their Bank of Objectives. And this is what Russia is bombing. Russia is bombing position of the jihadists or position that have been provided by these three countries as intelligence information to destroy warehouses of Al-Qaeda, headquarters of Al-Qaeda, and other jihadists.
I see. Excuse the background noise here. We have people moving in across the street, and now a landscaper just started, so I apologize for the background noise. So this battle isn't at all the way it's being portrayed here in Western media, where it's portrayed as there's a large army surrounding Idlib and about to move on it, and just keep taking territory until they reach the city of Idlib. For people who don't know, Idlib is a governorate, a province, and also there's Idlib city. So that's not the situation at all. There's massive amounts of negotiations going on with different groups, I take it, and as Turkey is able to convince some of them to leave, they do leave, or I guess some of them are laying down arms and joining. I'm not sure. Are they allowing these groups to lay down arms and reconcile too?
Yeah, I mean, there is negotiation on all levels, and it's intensive, and it is non-stop. And what the Western media is portraying is they are definite about an attack, a chemical attack against Idlib. They already talk like it is happening, and they are adamant about the American response that's going to destroy all the Syrian airports or the Syrian army infrastructure. And they are waiting if Russia is going to respond or not. So they have built this scenario and screaming for the support of what they say 3.2 or 3.5 million civilians. They're going to flee to Europe and invade Europe with jihadists. This is the scenario among mainstream media, that is addressing really itself, because journalists who are coming up with the same narrative are really talking to one another and writing exactly the same thing when the major population doesn't know where Idlib is on the map. Basically, what's happening is, as I explained, there is no attack against the city. There are 2 million, according to United Nations figures. There are 2 million in Idlib. There are 2 million civilians that are not under attack, that are not going to be under attack. It's only a suicider will launch a chemical attack when he knows that the Americans are waiting with a finger on the button to launch all their tomahawk and all their destructive arsenal against the Syrian army. And so there's no point in using chemical attacks when the area that is going to be recovered is the rural area of Latakia, the rural area of Hama and Aleppo, and the rural area of Idlib. The Idlib city itself is controlled by the group that is under Turkish control, and it was already agreed that the city of Idlib will follow the path of the political reconciliation before it is attacked. There are several cities in Syria that were not attacked, and there was a reconciliation with the local group, and city will be one of them.
Tell me again, which group is in charge of Idlib city?
Pro-Turkish, there are many groups. They will call them today the Army of Idlib. This is the name that the Turks are dwelling during the negotiation. And that includes all the group at the exception of Hayat Tahrir Sham until today, because probably they will join Tanzim Hurras al-Din and all the other jihadists and foreign fighters, Chinese and all the other nationalities, and those who are very much linked to ISIS, like Al-Aqsa and all the rest.
Where will those groups go, and what will happen to them?
They go nowhere. They have to be killed in Syria. Nobody wants them. Not even, why Syria should allow them to exist? These people are foreign fighters, and they come from different countries. There is not one country who wants them back.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood that there weren't negotiations going on with the pro-ISIS groups like the Uyghurs and I guess still Chechens there. And gosh, how many?
So far, sorry if I interrupt you. So far, the only country that managed to negotiate with a terrorist group and keep them under their umbrella and their protection is the United States of America. We have ISIS that is in the area, in the northeast Syria. There are still pockets there under the U.S. control. The area is under U.S. control. But Syria is saying, I don't want these people. I don't want Al-Qaeda. I don't want foreign fighters. I don't want Asian and Chinese and European and African and Middle Eastern foreign fighters coming here to die. If they want to come here to die, they are most welcome, because I'm going to fulfill their wishes and I want to kill them.
But they are in defined area. There's enough intelligence to know exactly where they are to attack.
Yes, they are all mainly in the area of Jisr Shuhur. They are in Taftanaz. There are an area around Idlib, and they are not in the city of Idlib. And they control the area in the northwest, close to rural Latakia, and that is the area that is northwest of the city of Idlib.
Right. I guess those are the ones firing armed drones and, I don't know, maybe artillery or things like that at the Russian air base.
Well, you see, it is known that air bombardment is not enough to remove enemies or group from an area, because the group get used to the air bombardment. You need troops on the ground. So the Syrian army must go in. But the Russians have been very slow in reacting. They allowed the Americans to prepare themselves, and they didn't act quickly, maybe because they want to avoid to rub against the Americans and to provoke the bombing of the Syrian army. and Putin will look either weak or he has to respond and then trigger a wider war. This is why Russia has been delaying and accepting the Turkish delays and asking for more time, etc. So maybe it's that.
I see. Yeah, because, I mean, what was it, the first week of September when it seemed like all the forces were in place and the operation was going to begin? But
Yes,
then it didn't really, other than some specific bombing specific targets. But there's been no significant troop movements. Is that true?
Yes, correct. I mean, the troops are all around their objective, and they haven't moved in.
So I assume that Russia and Syria, they took the threat seriously. And, the Syrian army is gathered in one relatively small area now, so they're vulnerable. Where they've been spread out across the country in most cases. Do they have most of their army assembled around Idlib now?
Not most of their army. They have a large number of the army because they are fighting alone without the allies, and the allies are only supporting the Aleppo front, preventing the jihadists from attacking Aleppo from the area of Al-Is, just in case the jihadists decide to open another front to divert the attention or to divide the main Arab force attacking and to split the force of the Syrian army. So the allies are not engaged, they will not be engaged with troops on the ground in the Battle of Idlib. It will be only Syrians, and the allies are only advisors and limiting themselves to be stationed in a defensive position in Idlib.
I guess one more thing is that, all through this war, we saw the negotiations being made in Aleppo and Daraa and all these different places, and the green buses taking the jihadis and their families to Idlib. And I don't know how many thousands of people that added to the population in Idlib, but what happened to these people? Are they going to stay in Idlib? Are they going? I mean, I know that these negotiations are large and complicated, and there are so many different groups, and these different groups want different things. But has the civilian population increased significantly in Idlib because of all of these well, I don't know what you call it, the bus transfers of people? Like what will happen? Has the population grown a lot, and what will happen to the people who are there temporarily? Do they move there and decide to stay there? Or, I'm confused by that.
Well, there are estimates because we all know in areas of war, the group responsible of distributing the funds or the support or the food or all the humanitarian support that comes from abroad, they tend to inflate the numbers to receive more and to stock more. This is what we have seen in all parts of Syria who were liberated, and particularly in Aleppo and Madaya, when people start saying they are starving, and they had stocks of weapons and food and ammunition and everything that could hold a siege for several years. Now in Idlib, the estimate is between 500,000 to 700,000 internally displaced population that came from all over Syria. Now these are divided in three parts today. One part went to Turkey, another part returned to the area controlled by the government because they saw that the government is not attacking or not seeking revenge against these families or their members. And the third part is prefer to remain in Idlib. Now, Idlib population before the war was less than 1 million. Today, they are estimate around a couple of millions, no more. But again, they can stay in Idlib until there is a political solution, as long as they don't stand next to jihadists and they don't go and live next to the jihadists and they don't support the jihadists.
I guess one last thing, it's getting harder to understand who the enemy is now, because the groups under the Turkish umbrella are now going to reconcile, apparently. Do you feel that Turkey will be able to keep these groups in line?
Well, yes, because for a very simple reason. First of all, there is a border crossing between Syria and Turkey, and it is controlled by al-Nusra. And if Turkey decides to close that crossing, people inside will not have much chances to survive. That's one. And I think the population inside Idlib is really not supporting the jihadists. And today, in Jisr Shur, where it is believed to be a large part of the jihadists there was a demonstration, a manifestation, and there are other manifestations happening in Idlib and in other places under the control of Turkey against the presence of the jihadists, and they raise the flag of the Syrian revolution, and there are no black flags that belong to Al-Qaeda. So they made a point to avoid having any link to the jihadists. Therefore, even the population is rejecting the jihadists. And Russia knows that. The Syrian army knows that. And they take that into consideration, and they're asking for the elimination of jihadists, but not for the city and its population to surrender. There were manifestations in Ma'arat Na'man. There were manifestations everywhere in the area under the control of Turkey, like Atma, Khan Shaykhun, Ariha, Talat Madik, Atarib, everywhere. And these they didn't come to say, we support the revolution, we are against Bashar al-Assad. They came out without saying it, that they are not jihadists and they don't support the jihadists and they don't support al-Nusra and others.
Okay. So what you've been saying or telling me for a long time was warning about how strong Al-Qaeda was in Syria because they had popular support. I mean, you've been saying that for years. So yes. That's what's been undermined now.
Yeah, and now without the population support, the time has come to finish off the jihadists. There are Syrians who are against the regime. The Syrian government in Damascus, they have the right to say they don't agree with their government. And there are Syrians with the government, and they have the right to say, we support our government. But they don't have the right to protect foreigners, jihadists coming to kill Syrians and to fight in their country. The biggest mistake of the Syrian, let's call it revolution, is when the Syrians took up the arms against the government and they didn't carry on with a peaceful demonstration.
Well, that seems like a great place to end it, Elijah. I appreciate the explanations. I know sometimes it must be frustrating because I don't understand everything and I ask a lot of questions, but I really do appreciate you explaining it to me, and I understand it a whole lot better than I did before we started. And,
well, if that gives you some comfort, I don't understand everything sometimes.
Anything else that you want to say before we wrap up?
I think that is enough for the poor ear of the listener.
Yeah, exactly. Please tell everyone where they can find your work and how they can support you.
Well, my work is on my blog, and it's Elijah J. Magnier. If you Google that, you will find my blog. And I really ask for anyone who reads my article to support. There is a PayPal, and I'm thinking by the end of the year, if there's not going to be any support, then to start asking for subscription. So for me to avoid going through that, please support the blog and I invest a lot in writing it. And I have many people who are wonderfully supporting me in writing in different languages, just to pass on the message and for a wider audience to understand at least what I understand from the conflict, and to share the experience and the contact and the information I have.
I will put links for everyone in the show notes. There'll be links to Elijah's blog and the PayPal link where you can support him. And I strongly recommend doing that. He's a treasure. And thank you so much, Elijah. Please stay safe, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much. All the best.
I'd just like to add a post-interview update here and cite a few things in the interest of bringing things up to date to today, Monday, September 17th, just before this episode is published. We did the interview a couple of days ago on Friday, and things move quickly. As you recall, during the interview, Elijah had mentioned that he was going to publish an article some hours later about many of the things that he had discussed with me during the interview. And we now have that article, and it's titled, "The Liberation of Idlib, Turkey is in the Way, with Russia Slowing Down." And I'd just like to read a few excerpts to re-emphasize some key points. Elijah says, quote, "Turkey is pushing further reinforcements of troops, commando units, and tanks in the northern city of Idlib and around it for a specific objective: to disrupt the attack against the city by the Syrian forces and their allies supported by Russia. Ankara is indeed taking advantage of the Russian slowing down of its strategy to liberate the city from jihadists, including Al-Qaeda, due to the U.S. threat to bomb the Syrian army and government forces under that excuse of, quote, using chemical weapons, unquote." Elijah later continues, quote, "Russia considers the Turkish reinforcements as a breach of the Astana Turkish-Russian-Iranian deal." And another excerpt, he says, "Ankara's troops are bringing in more military personnel, as Turkey presents it, to support all Turkish proxies in their battle against jihadists who refuse to surrender or merge with the other groups." Another excerpt, "According to my sources, Turkey, quote, is asking for more time to solve the situation in Idlib without a fight. Also, it's proposing to solve the issue of tens of thousands of its armed Syrian proxy militants when the political reconciliation has matured. All of these indicate strongly that Turkey is not willing to leave Syria." And one last excerpt from that article, quote, "What is clear so far is the certainty that President Assad is not ready to give up Idlib to President Erdogan. Assad is said to be ready to start the attack in a few weeks, even alone, at the cost of dragging everybody behind him onto the battlefield," unquote. There's another article worth mentioning from last week in Al Monitor, September 12th, titled, "Can Erdogan Intimidate Assad into Backing Off Idlib?" And a quote from that is, "Karim Haas, a Moscow-based academic specializing in Russia and Eurasia, told Al Monitor, quote, Russia is in a hurry to get Idlib out of the way to focus on drawing Europe into helping finance the reconstruction of Syria, unquote. The lurking suspicion, at least in the regime and Tehran's minds, is that Turkey may be playing a double game to buy time to convince the United States to resume support for the rebels so as to crank up pressure on Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to step down. As ever, Washington appears to be sending mixed signals to Ankara over Syria. The Donald Trump administration has said it wants to pull out of northeast Syria, where it is in the last stages of its campaign against the Islamic State by the end of this year. It now says it will stay to finish off Islamic State and to ensure Iran's departure. The shift was confirmed by the administration's newly minted Syria envoy, Jim Jeffrey, who told the Washington Post, quote, "We are not in a hurry to withdraw. I'm confident the president is on board with this," unquote. In a later excerpt, they quote Karim Haas again, the Moscow academic, saying, quote, "The U.S. strategy is to disrupt Russian plans in Syria, and by appearing to side with Turkey on Idlib, to torpedo Turkish-Russian rapprochement." And there's a Reuters article on September 12th titled, "Turkey Reinforces Military in Syria's Idlib After Ceasefire Call Fails," where they talked with the rebel groups. Quote, "Turkey's reinforcing its military post inside Syria's rebel-held province of Idlib," Turkish and Syrian rebel sources say, seeking to deter a government offensive, which it says would unleash a humanitarian disaster on its border, unquote. Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar says, "Turkey remains determined to halt the weeks-long airstrikes on Idlib and forestall a ground offensive, while officials warn that Turkey would respond if its forces inside Idlib come under fire." Another quote, a Syrian rebel said, quote, "There are very big reinforcements of Turkish forces inside Syria, and these observation posts have in effect become permanent military bases." And then lastly, quote, "Rebel sources told Reuters that Turkey has also stepped up supplies to the rebel sources in Idlib in recent days, including ammunition and rockets," unquote. Now, there's also some news that broke yesterday, reported by Marisalon, the Syrian reporters, in an article titled, "Notorious Terrorist Commander Eliminated by Syrian Troops in Idlib." They reported that on September 10th, the commander of the Turkish-backed Syrian opposition group, Ahrar al-Sham, was killed by the Syrian military. His name was Khaled al-Hassan. His nom de guerre was Abu al-Walid Kurnaz. His car was spotted by a surveillance drone and then hit by Syrian military artillery. Technically, he was a leader of the National Liberation Front, which is a new merger of Ahrar al-Sham and other al-Qaeda and ISIS-affiliated factions. The death was reported after the opposition media released some video footage. Now, we also have a new analysis published yesterday by Bernard of Moon of Alabama, and he cites Elijah's latest article, also an extensive South Front article on Turkey's role in Syria, and an analysis from Arab Weekly. The Moon of Alabama piece is titled, "Syria, the Rationale Behind the Delay of Idlib's Liberation." The South Front analysis concludes that Turkey's pursuing the following tactical goals, and I quote, "To eliminate or at least disarm and limit the influence of U.S.-backed Kurdish armed groups in northern Syria, to strengthen a united pro-Turkish opposition, Idlib, and to eliminate any resistance to it, including, in some scenarios, the elimination of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and its allies, and to facilitate the return of refugees from Turkey to Syrian areas under its own control." Quote, "If these goals are achieved, Ankara will significantly increase its influence on the diplomatic settlement of the crisis and on the future of post-war Syria. The returned refugees and supporters of militant groups in the Turkish-controlled part of Syria will become an electoral base of pro-Turkish political figures and parties in case of the implementation of the peaceful scenario. If no wide-scale diplomatic deal on the conflict is reached, one must consider the possibility of a pro-Turkish quasi-state in northern Syria, confirming the thesis that Erdogan is seeking to build a neo-Ottoman empire." Bernard believes that, quote, "The operation has to wait until the congressional elections in the U.S. are over and the danger of a U.S. escalation for domestic policy reasons recedes. Russia also fears that an attack on Idlib right now could reunite the U.S. and Turkey and lead to a new coordinated onslaught in Syria," unquote. He then cites Thomas Siebert of the Arab Weekly, who predicts that the U.S.-Turkish relationship will worsen considerably after the U.S. sanctions against Iran's oil industry go into effect in November. Turkey relies on Iranian oil, and it's likely to defy those U.S. sanctions. And Siebert says that Turkey wants to employ the former al-Qaeda affiliate Ahrar al-Sham, HTS, is an acronym, in other areas under their control, not eliminate them, just swap them out for Turkish-backed militants. Now, both Elijah and Bernard seem to doubt that an arrangement like this will work. Elijah mentions this offer in his latest article, saying that it was rejected by Russia and definitely not trusted by Syria. Bernard notes that the HTS sentiment toward the Turkish army inside Idlib is less than cordial, to put it lightly. And finally, just to bring all of this completely up to date, let's look at Elijah's breaking news and comments on Twitter today after the Putin-Erdogan meeting in Sochi. So breaking news from today, Monday, September 17th. These are comments from Elijah on Twitter. Around noon, he said, #breaking news, Syria, Idlib postponed until 15 December. To start with, a 15-kilometer buffer zone and an engagement of Turkey to disarm Nusra or merge it and neutralize all other jihadists. In a different tweet, Elijah also mentions, quote, 2 phases, one October 10th, 2 December 15th, since Putin had mentioned some date of October 10th for one phase of it. And then he says, #Moscow has accepted to give Ankara more time, for after the U.S. sanctions really, to sort out Idlib and the jihadists in the city, diffusing the U.S. intention to bomb Syria. So, no job for warmongers for the next couple of months. Find another war. Then he says Turkey wants the Idlib case to be postponed until the constitutional changes and the peace process to kick off in Geneva. More time for Idlib and Turkey to sort out its affairs with the Syrian proxies. And he cites his latest article that we discussed just in this interview. Then he says, more, Turkey has the right to pursue any group in Idlib and to bring further military forces in the city to stop jihadists. What is huge is Russia signed a military agreement with a NATO member, Turkey and Syria. NATO won't like that at all. #Damascus approves the Moscow-Ankara signed agreement between the two defense ministers, Russian and Turkish. And then he says that his best guess is, quote, I believe infighting, proxies and jihadists, will take place in Idlib. Turkey will show its commitment because it has no other alternative. And then lastly, in response to people who are disappointed about the delay in the Idlib operation, Elijah says, guys, have some rest away from war. Why on earth do you want the war to continue if there's room for diplomacy? Do you think liberating Idlib is a promenade? Thousands will be killed on both sides. Give it a break and let Turkey have its chance with its own jihadists. And that's our show. Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Elijah Magnier. Follow him on Twitter at EJMAlrai. That's EJMALRAI. And find his work at ejmagnier.com. Also support him by using the PayPal link at the bottom of the page on his site. The Around the Empire podcast is independent media brought to you with the help of our generous donors. You can pitch in at patreon.com/aroundtheempire or by doing one-time donations on our website, aroundtheempire.com. Follow us on Twitter at aroundtheempire. Helps a lot if you hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, and that's free, because it's possible to get revenue from that channel via live streams with super chat donations capability after the number of subscribers reaches 1,000. We're not there yet. Also, use the thumbs up icon to like the individual videos. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcast, or on your preferred radio podcast apps. We're now on Spotify and iHeartRadio. And if you like the podcast, take a minute, leave a nice review. It helps us. And lastly, please like our page on Facebook. And we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.